All right, shaders are compiling. Hopefully that means we won't have a ton of stutters. This is an Unreal Engine 5 game, but there's not a lot of information on what kind of performance to expect from the game developer. If I check their Steam page, there's a minimum system requirement. There's no recommended, and even the minimum doesn't tell you what sort of performance to expect from that. So it does say the minimum GPU should be an RTX 2060 Super or a Radeon RX 6600, but other than that, and that the CPUs should be at least a 10700K or Ryzen 5 3600. It's like, what sort of performance we'll be getting from the minimum? I don't know. Like I said, it's a UE5 game. Now, I'm interested in this game. I didn't really like the first one, only played it a little bit, and then I think I refunded it. I like From Software titles, but a lot of these Souls-like games don't really grab me. Lies of P has been one of the only non-From Software ones I actually ended up really liking. However, Mortal Shell 2 is coming out to really strong reviews out of the gate, with a lot of people saying it's up there with games like Lies of P as one of the best non-From Software Souls-like titles. Looking like it's off to a decent start on Steam database for player counts. It looks like it's still heading up in the first hour or so, and this is despite the fact that the people playing today had to pay an extra $10 for like early access kind of situation, where it's $50 for the game, but if you want to play before the 20th, you pay $60, which is what I did, because I'm sure I can get at least the extra $10 out of making this video out of it content-wise, and the content will perform better if I get it out there as early as possible. But it is one of those pay for some advanced access type games, which it's kind of annoying, but I guess I get why developers want to get as much money out of people as possible. There is an open beta, though, which I haven't checked out yet, because for performance reasons, I've noticed sometimes beta test versions aren't the full release version of the game, so I did want to give it a fair shake here. Now, since there's not much in the way of, like I said, recommended system requirements, I'm going to go with the system that's slightly above their minimum requirement and is pretty well in line with the Steam hardware survey. So, like, I'm going to use an RTX 3060 to start out. Now, then we'll try some more advanced systems, like a more modern mid-range system. This is more like somebody built a lower mid-range PC 5 years ago and is still using it, which I think, as you can see here, is pretty typical of the Steam hardware survey. And I'll go with the CPU that's a bit above what their minimum requirement is. Their minimum is Ryzen 5 3600. I'm going to go with the Ryzen 5 5600X, which is one generation newer. And so that's a good simulation, like I said, of somebody built a mid-range PC 5 years ago and is still using it, trying to play this game. Looks like it's starting with a pre-rendered cinematic, so I'm not going to judge the performance off that, but some UE5 games get bad frame pacing on the pre-rendered video, and this looks like to be a pretty stable 60 FPS. So it seems like they at least got the pre-rendered video correct, at least on my setup here, unlike actually a surprising number of games. I'll mention this option because I think it might affect performance, that there's two camera styles, action and immersive. Looks like immersive was the default, but action pulls the camera back to provide greater awareness during exploration and combat. Pulling the camera back can sometimes increase performance demand, so I think I'm going to do that. Plus, if it gives me better awareness during exploration and combat, that sounds like the way to go for what could be a difficult game. I like to start judging games initially based on their default out-of-the-box settings. Now, I've set this to a 1080p display, given that we're testing out the older mid-range system with the RTX 3060, and the out-of-the-box experience the game defaulted to for somebody who just starts playing the game and doesn't adjust settings was balanced DLSS. With VSync turned on, now I'm going to turn that off, which means you may see screen tearing and motion judder artifacts because I'm capturing on a second PC through HDMI capture, 60 FPS capture, and if our footage is not linked to exactly 60 FPS, that can create motion judders, so make sure that you're judging smoothness by this frame time graph, where blips and stutters on the frame time graph are showing whether the game plays smooth or not the actual video feed that you're watching. So do be careful with that. And it defaulted to a 60 FPS frame limit. I'm going to go ahead and turn the frame limit off. There we go, unlimited, so we can measure the full performance that the game's able to get. It looks like there is frame generation. It looks like it does support turning on FSR frame generation. On on a NVIDIA GPU, but it looks like if I do that, it pushes me out of the DLSS upscaling pathway. Now I'm gonna go ahead and leave frame generation off because, I mean, that's just my preference for how to play. But also, we're trying to measure performance, and frame generation is really more of an optional motion smoothing technology, not a performance technology. The quality settings defaulted to medium settings, and looks like it defaults to chromatic aberration, film grain, lens flares on, although it does default to motion blur off, so some people will be happy to see that. I may at some point turn off chromatic aberration, film grain, but I do like to start out by just playing exactly how things were defaulted to. The only thing I changed were the 60 FPS lock stuff so we can fully monitor the performance settings. So we're gonna apply that. So basically it defaults to medium settings with DLSS balance. Now, speaking of DLSS, I have the developer DLSS overlay turned on, and it shows that it's using DLSS preset K. So that is one of the transformer models. So it's not one of those new games that's shipping with the older versions of DLSS, like pre-transformer model, like we saw with Beast of Reincarnation, for example. All right, so I just got control of the camera. There's a little bit of cutscene stuff at the beginning, panning around. I'm getting actually nearly 100 FPS. And I was curious because on this kind of a system, I'm using an older CPU as well as a GPU, which would be the kind of the limiting factor. Looks like we're mostly GPU limited here, although the GPU can drop to around 90% usage at times. So we could be also nearing the limits of the CPU or underlying platform, however you want to think about that as well. But yeah, out of the box settings are defaulting to around 100 FPS, at least in this opening area. Although keep in mind, this is using DLSS balanced on the medium graphics preset. But overall, if I'm looking for performance at out-of-the-box settings, things look pretty solid, at least in this initial waking up area. So I'll play a little bit more, see if I'm imagining I might get into more demanding areas, although there's already a lot of foliage and stuff, which can sometimes be one of the more demanding performance things in games. Well, I'm definitely not very far into the game. I think this is actually a good place to talk about performance because I found an area that has a lot more NPCs and there's a fire and things like that, but I'm also not in combat, so I can kind of stop for a second, play with graphic settings and such. So also like kind of liking the creepy like weird bagpipe music around. Not that I like the music, but like I like the feel they're going for here with this kind of a setting. You're definitely kind of wondering what is happening here. Why are they all in the robes with the flowers and kind of weirdness happening? But the point is, you can see performance here is a lot tougher than where we were earlier. If I stand still, you can see I'm around like 89 FPS or so. If I'm running around, it does dip to closer to 80, even into the 70s and such. And you can see that the CPU cores can be worked a lot harder here as well. So a lot of times with Unreal Engine 5, you get a lot more NPCs on screen, and it can stress the CPU a bit. And you can see as I'm running around here, the GPU utilization does drop below 90% a lot of the time, indicating that it's either a CPU limitation or some other underlying system, like streaming in stuff, whatever. Something that's not the GPU's fault. It's the underlying system, CPU, RAM, storage, all that kind of stuff, PCIe bus, cache, somewhere in there, that's the limiting factor. So it's looking like this Ryzen 5 5600X based system is going to top out in areas with a lot more NPCs, somewhere in that kind of 80-ish FPS range. The average, by the way, is the middle FPS number. The one on the far right is the 1% lows. You can also see things can get a little bit stuttery when you're especially more system limited and not GPU limited. GPU limited behavior tends to be a little bit smoother when you look at the frame time graph and the 1% lows here. Now, because performance is still fairly good though, especially regarding the hardware we have, I'm going to go ahead and adjust to native resolution rather than be at the default settings. Remember, it defaulted to DLSS balanced, which, by the way, again, if you look at this DLSS overlay I've enabled, right here you can see the input resolution, and then it's outputting a 1080p image through DLSS. So that was really at 630p internally being upscaled to a 1080p output. What I'm gonna do now is switch it to native 1080p, but still using DLSS to do it, meaning it'll be DLAA. Even though this game just calls it DLSS native, that's effectively DLAA. So you're just using DLSS algorithm for high quality anti-aliasing, but this is gonna be a full native 1080p resolution for the GPU. And if I do that, it's looking like at least standing still. We are around 60 FPS, and here you can confirm, because some games I've noticed have faked this, and they don't actually give you the resolution they say in the menu. It is 1080p in to 1080p out. So this is actually native 1080p here using DLAA. And yeah, it's looking like we're averaging around 60 FPS when I'm standing still here. As I run around, we can see it puts additional stress on the system, and still hangs out close to 60, although we can see the 1% lows do drop actually into the mid-30s, so it's not perfectly smooth. But like I said, this is a lot of NPCs on screen. There's the fire, all of that. Okay, so that's, I think, a good approximation of what's going on this kind of a platform, because I know I'm not super far in the game, but this, for what tends to stress Unreal Engine, I think is a pretty good test here with all these NPCs and whatnot on the screen. So I think this might be a good place to be testing out some more PCs, other systems. Okay, compiling shaders on the next system, but what did I choose? Well, if we look back at the Steam hardware survey again, we already tested the most popular GPU, which is the 3060, but the most popular current generation GPU is the RTX 5070. And right next to me, I actually have a PC I'm working on a review for. It'll probably be published within the next few days. But a bit of a white background here, so flashbang warning. This is the store page for it. Now, this has a 5070 in it. It's kind of a small, compact PC, not as small as like a Steam machine, but this has a 5070 in it, so I'll be using this to run the test since I already have that set up. And I have the version with 64 gigabytes of RAM and a 2 terabyte SSD. One thing I'll mention in the review is I think that it would make more sense to save money in the current RAM and storage pricing economy to use 32 gigabytes of system RAM and 1 terabyte SSD, but just mentioning why this is kind of a little overbuilt is that's the review sample that was sent me. Interesting note on the CPU in this system is I think to preserve the size and power draw of the system, they're using a mobile CPU, but it's the AMD Ryzen 9 9955HX3D, which is the 16-core 32-thread X3D CPU, so like the highest-end mobile CPU you can get that's pretty close in performance to the desktop 9000 X3D-based CPUs. So this is a much higher-end CPU-based platform, but kind of an interesting little mobile desktop hybrid kind of system. So that's what I'm testing out next. Let's see if these shaders are almost compiled. They are going a lot faster since the CPUs compile these shaders, and this is a 16-core 32-thread setup. All right, just popped in on the new system. Let's go ahead and take a look. So what did it default to? And I did ask it to reset to default settings, and it has defaulted once again to medium settings with DLSS balanced. So it's seeming like that might not be taking into account what sort of PC you have. It might just be it always defaults to those settings. Not completely sure based on just testing out 2 PCs, but it certainly seems to be the case. Now I'm once again going to turn off VSync and the frame rate limiter, which means that you may see screen tearing, motion judder, etc. in the footage since we're capturing at 60 FPS. Frame generation is off here. Like I said, medium settings and all that are the defaults here. Now, one thing I want to look at is resolution. So this is on a 4K setup, which might be a bit much, but then again, we're medium settings DLSS balance. So let's play this for a minute and see how that goes. Whoa, I had inverted camera controls and it did not carry that over with my, with my cloud save. So let me fix that. Okay, back to inverted camera controls. All right, so again, this is just medium settings DLSS balance, but with a 4K output, so significantly heavier workload here, but we're on the higher end PC with the 5070 and the mobile X3D based CPU. And we can also, just out of interest, since I'm working on the review, take a look at like, temperatures, all that on this system, and fan noise doesn't sound too loud or anything either. And we notice that this area wasn't as demanding as when we get down there to that bonfire type area. So I'm gonna get down there. It doesn't take long to get it, and I'll kind of sprint on the way so we can look at how things stream in and everything. But yeah, it's looking like we're averaging nearly 100 FPS. Okay, now running around this bonfire area, things certainly are more demanding here. So this is more demanding, but we're kind of looking like in the mid 80s or so on that. And here it's looking like we're still more GPU limited, with the GPU usage staying around 98%. I saw it briefly dip to 96%, but that seems to be, yeah, a few flashes where it's probably streaming something in and it drops a little bit under the 98%, but overall looking like, yeah, kind of averaging around 92 FPS here. 1% lows can dip into the 50s, but this does seem like a good kind of stress test area for doing some of the testing. So with that in mind, I think it's going to make sense to test out a few other things. One thing is just if I wanted to be playing at a little bit higher graphic settings, I think would make sense. But before we adjust graphic settings where I'll restart the game, I think I want to check out just different resolutions. Because on a 5070, I think a lot of people would be playing at 1440p and not 720p. Here we go. So let's set it to 1440p. This is DLSS, looks like it went down to performance mode. That might have been my mistake. Okay, so 1440p, DLSS balanced medium settings. My guess is we'll start to see more of the CPU limitation here, but perhaps not. Yeah, it looks like this CPU is way more capable. We're up here around 140 FPS with still 97% GPU utilization. So things looking pretty solid here. 1% low is a lot better now as well. So yeah, looks like if you want it to be pretty performant on this type of a system, can absolutely do that. But I think we have the headroom to push graphic settings on this style of game that I'd play with a controller. Like, I'm fine. I don't need 140 FPS necessarily. I could push graphic settings a bit. Or we could turn off the resolution scaling. So let's go up to native resolution before we adjust the other graphic settings. Keep it at 1440p. Let's go with DLSS at the native. So this is a native 1440p medium settings. Let's see how that goes. Resetting the averages and all that. Looks like we are, yeah, around 90 FPS or so. Native 1440p, but it is only the medium settings. Now, in most Unreal Engine 5 games, I've noticed that the high graphics settings tend to be kind of the sweet spot between completely overdone maximum settings and the lower settings where you lose some resolution. Looks like hardware ray tracing is also available, but currently turned off. So let's go up to the high settings at native. I'll apply this, but I'm also going to restart the game just to be thorough, because some games need a restart to fully apply things. All right, so full restart on the game, 1440p native DLAA, and with high settings, but hardware ray tracing is not turned on. That is set to off. We'll start this run down to the bonfire again. Looks like sprinting down, we're at like 90-something FPS range, although the frame time graph doesn't look amazing while we're sprinting down here, so that's interesting. Maybe if I stand still is a little better. Yeah, so that might be kind of stressing out streaming things in as I sprint. Interesting on that. Like I said, I did restart the game fully to give it a chance to apply everything. So yeah, it's looking like overall the high settings with the hardware RT turned off, but native 1440p on the 5070 is pretty solid here in the upper 70s or so around the bonfire. The overall run down to the bonfire and now around it is kind of averaging in the mid 80s. Seems fairly solid. And then using DLSS, if I did want to go down to balance level upscale at these high settings, I think we'll probably still be in pretty good shape. And yeah, actually looking like we're averaging well over 100 FPS here, even around the bonfire, like 120, 130 or so on that. Now, maybe before we start testing out the hardware ray tracing, which it looks like we might have the performance headroom to do, let's try going all the way up to Ultra. Does it go beyond Ultra? It looks like Ultra is the top end preset here. So we're up to Ultra settings.
Come on, Lavender. Dance with me.
And I'm going to go ahead and restart the game to be sure that they applied properly. All right, full game restart, native 1440p with DLAA, ultra settings, which is the max preset, other than I have hardware RT currently turned off. And I will say that in a lot of Unreal Engine 5 games, you do not average over 60 FPS on a 5070 on the ultra preset. Even games that don't even offer the hardware-based ray tracing. Again, sprinting in right now, the frame time graph still looks a little slow. It could be that it's loading into the area and would smooth out a little bit, and if I stand still, that's a bit smoother, so I'm still noticing that a little bit of spikiness to the frame time graph, but the gameplay feels fairly smooth though still. Now, as I run around the bonfire at the native 1440p Ultra, but no hardware RT, it does look like we're hitting around 60 FPS on that. So it's looking like 60 FPS at ultra settings, as long as you don't turn on the hardware-based RT, is completely doable on the 5070. Like I said, a lot of UE5 games, that's not necessarily the case. Now, before I turn on the hardware RT, let's also try out the ultra settings with a little bit of resolution scaling. So let's go to balanced DLSS with the ultra preset. So balanced DLSS, ultra preset, running around the bonfire, lots of NPCs, all of that. Seems to be averaging nearly 100. Ooh, got a big stutter there for a second. So not quite sure what that was about. That's the first major stutter I've seen, and I'm still just running around the bonfire. But UE5 games do occasionally be stuttery. I don't know if a random shader happened to pop up there that we hadn't seen yet. So yeah, it looks like pretty solid average FPS numbers here with DLSS kicked on. Now let's take a look at what if we turn on the hardware-based ray tracing. So that can often be a pretty heavy setting, but we'll have a look. And I do want to restart the game before judging it. All right, so this is native 1440p DLAA ultra settings with hardware ray tracing turned on. So we are now completely maxing out the game at native 1440p. This is still that 5070 based pre-built system. And running on down here, again, the sprint does seem to be stressing something out a little bit on that frame time graph. Again, when I settle down and kind of stand still, things look a little bit smoother there on the frame time graph. There's small blips, but they're certainly visible there. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and run down, but like I said, ultra settings with hardware RT at native 1440p in most UE5 games are not going to be near 60 FPS here. And honestly, I'm not seeing much less performance with the hardware RT turned on than what we were seeing with it turned off. So that's interesting. Now, if we do kick on some upscaling as we run around the bonfire, go to the balanced upscale, I think we should be seeing pretty good performance here. And that does seem to be the case, restarting the averages, running around the bonfire. And yeah, we're still pretty dang close to 100 FPS or so on these completely maxed out settings, 1440p output with DLSS balanced. Ooh, there's that big stutter again though as I run around the bonfire. We should have already compiled all the shaders in the area, so I wonder if that's more of some sort of a traversal thing. I'm hoping that's not going to be a recurring thing throughout the game. That's actually, maybe they're just trying to be true to From Software titles, because in most like Dark Souls games, Elden Ring, all that, you get these random big stutters out of nowhere, and it's not shader compilation because they're repeatable. So, but this is UE5 and it's a different developer, so that's interesting. They're wearing masks under these interesting robes and whatnot. This is certainly some creepy vibes here when you think about it. Anyway, let's go ahead and actually test out 4K. This is actually so performant that I want to try out the maximum settings at 4K. This is 4K DLSS balanced, although actually I usually do performance upscaling on 4K. So DLSS performance, 4K output, ultra settings, hardware RT on the 5070. And it looks like we're over 60 FPS even around this bonfire type area. So look, I realize that I'm obviously barely even starting the game, so certainly there could be areas that get really open, maybe are more demanding than what we're seeing here, which is completely fine. But I would say that this is performant enough in this area that I would say that there's some headroom for performance to go down in heavier areas, and I would still be pretty solid, especially for a UE5 game here at maxed out settings with the hardware RT turned on. And all of that. So yeah, I'd say this is pretty performant. Even the 5070 max settings 4K DLSS performance mode seems to be doing all right. Now, obviously, if I was trying to do native 4K, I'm sure that we would not be doing quite as well on a 5070. So we could take a look at that. Yeah, so we're, you know, in more like the 30s, but it is a 5070. This is now max settings native 4K resolution, which is a bit much. All right, I do want to try out an AMD GPU and also go a little lower than the 5070, because even though that's pretty popular, a lot of people might have something a little bit less performant. It has passed my main AMD GPU test in these videos, which is making sure it has a new enough version of FSR installed for the FSR 4 upgrade to work in the driver software, and that does show up with the active check mark, so we seem to be good. So, good news for the AMD gamers out there. Default settings once again went to medium with balance level upscaling, and I turned off the VSync and frame rate limiting, but other than that, that's all I've done. Might as well go ahead and run around with these settings before we test out some other stuff, since it is the default. And I am defaulting to, not defaulting to, but I chose to use 1440p resolution for this GPU. This is the 9060 XT 16GB version. The 9060 XT, very similar to the 5060 Ti performance-wise. 5060 Ti on average is maybe somewhere between 5 and 10% faster, but it's not a huge difference. I'm gonna make sure the bagpipes aren't too loud for us here. Okay, getting into this area, and yeah, at these settings, which is balanced FSR 4 upscaling, which is looking pretty solid here, and medium graphics preset, yeah, averaging over 100 FPS or so, so pretty solid on that. And the underlying platform here is no longer the little, I was gonna say mini PC, but it's sort of a smallish PC that I was reviewing. This is now my benchmarking system with the 9800X3D and 32 gigabytes of system RAM. But yeah, it looks like at the default settings, we'll be getting over 100 FPS on a 1440p display, which looks pretty solid. Before I go off of the medium settings, let's check out just using native resolution on the FSR pathway. So we're using kind of like DLAA, but this is like the FSR version of that, where it'll be native 1440p medium settings and using FSR 4 algorithm for a really high quality anti-aliasing treatment. And it is looking like we're averaging around 60, mid 60s or so at those settings. So I definitely think that there's headroom to try out some more aggressive settings. And since the ultra settings ran so well on the 5070, now the 5070 is a more expensive and higher tier GPU for sure, I am gonna go ahead and try it out though, going all the way up to max settings, even with hardware RT on, because I think we're gonna do reasonably well, especially if we allow a little bit of upscaling. I will restart the game for best practices here. All right, so after a restart, we're now native FSR 4 1440p output and input and ultra settings with hardware ray tracing turned on. And we're just on the mid-range 9060 XT 16GB. So not super powerful hardware, although it is a, you know, current generation GPU, which is newer than what a lot of people may actually be using. Looks like in this area, we're averaging mid 50s. I have a feeling when we get down to our friendly little bonfire down there that will decrease FPS a little bit, I would guess to around 50 or so. But let's go ahead and see what it's actually like when we get down there. But this is completely maxed out settings at native 1440p. And it's looking like we're averaging, yeah, it looks like kind of mid 40s here as we run around. I'll reset the frame rate average around the bonfire. And as I run around, it is, yeah, kind of mid 40s or so. But I have a feeling that means that if we just kick on a little bit of FSR, we could play at the maximum settings. Otherwise, besides the upscale, and FSR 4 looks pretty solid. So yeah, that got us all the way up to in the mid 70s or so. So you could definitely play the game at max settings with a little bit of upscaling, or even at native if you're okay with the mid 40s, which on a controller isn't the end of the world, but I'd probably try to do something a little bit more optimal than that. Now, I am curious if I just turn off the hardware-based ray tracing, how much our performance changes. So turning off the hardware-based ray tracing, it doesn't seem to be having huge performance differences, really. I could even try going back to native resolution on the FSR here. Ah, it stopped going TSR. There we go. I don't know why, but somehow the way it highlights the thing that I'm selecting in the menu is throwing me off in this game. I always think I'm on a different thing than what I'm actually on. So yeah, it doesn't seem like the hardware-based RT on or off is making a huge difference in the performance, at least in this area of the game I'm in now, which does have reflective puddles and things. So anyway, seems like it should be doing something in this scene, but doesn't seem to have a major performance impact one way or the other. Same kind of thing I saw when testing out the 5070. So I do want to also try just going down to high settings with the hardware RT off, and I will restart the game and all that just to make sure everything applied properly. Okay, so we're now looking at high settings, hardware RT turned off, and we're at native resolution using the FSR4 for a high-quality anti-aliasing solution at native 1440p resolution. And I'm hoping that at these high settings we can maintain a 60-ish average, even on a 9060 XT. Because, you know, dropping down a little bit from those ultra settings, turn the hardware RT off, even though it didn't seem to have a huge performance demand, and kind of repeat our run down here. This kind of area, like I said, performance certainly seems higher. We're averaging around 70, but get lots of NPCs on screen with the fire effects and all of that, with the reflections in the puddles. This seems like a pretty decent stress test. And we're averaging a little under 60 in this area. I'll reset the averages now that we're in this area just for that. And yeah, it looks pretty close to 60. So, like I said, there's no way for this day one kind of performance review that I can play enough of the game to get an idea for how the entire game performs. But fire on screen, ton of NPCs, reflective puddles, lots of foliage and trees. This is usually a fairly demanding type of scene, and we're hitting around 60 at high settings with native 1440p on the 9060 XT. I'll go ahead and kick on like FSR quality. And run around and maybe give some final thoughts, because I think I've got enough data here for a conclusion, which is basically based on what I'm able to test in this video. As Unreal Engine 5 games go, this does not seem to be one of the more demanding ones. There's a frame time spike right there, though. We saw that on a completely different PC with the 5070 as well in this sort of an area. So it doesn't seem to be immune to some random stutters. They don't seem to be shader compilation as far as I can tell, because it does seem to repeat in the same areas at times. So it could be more of a traversal thing. I don't know if I'm passing some kind of boundary line where it loads in. So my guess would be on a long playthrough, you are going to get a few random, stutter spikes and things like that. But overall, just performance-wise, so when you aren't hitting one of those little stutters, it seems like you're able to get pretty decent performance out of this game. So even older mid-range systems should be able to play it, and the newer systems even playing at higher resolutions, especially if you're willing to use upscaling. But it also doesn't seem like you require upscaling to get around a 60 FPS experience. Even at high settings here on like a 9060 XT, which, like I said, for NVIDIA users, it's more like a 5060 Ti kind of use case. And in this kind of stress testy sort of area with all the NPCs, fire, all of that, around 60 FPS. So I would say that performance-wise, I don't really have concerns based on what I've seen. But like I said, this is just the intro area of the game, best I can do for this type of day one performance review, though. I'm interested enough in this game that I think I am going to continue playing it. But obviously wouldn't be able to get you that in a day one performance review. Hopefully you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and you all have an excellent day.